And thank you. We'll ask questions after we complete the panel. Yeah. So we'll go to Steve Keck, the Budget Director. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and Senators. Yeah. Beg your pardon. Thank you, Chair and Senators. My name is Stephen Keck. I am the Chief Budget Officer at Caltrans. I've been asked today to come and speak a little bit about transportation funding and a little bit more about transportation backlog in terms of our needs for maintaining and rehabilitating our state highway system. I'm going to be as brief as possible walking through the funding section because I know the meat of this is in our needs. What I really want to get across with the funding, and turning to page 2 of your package that I handed out earlier, is that our taxation system in California is based on an excise tax system, which is essentially a tax per unit of sale, not on the value of the sale. So when we're talking about transportation revenues that are available for fix-it-first priorities, we're talking about a price per gallon sold. So this is an excise tax per gallon sold. In California, we have 3 excise taxes on gasoline. 18.4 cents a gallon is federal. 18 cents per gallon is a base excise tax, which has been in place in one form or another since 1923. And it is the most flexible source and the only one state source available for fix-it-first priorities. And then there's a price-based excise tax, which is currently 18 cents and will be reduced likely to 12 cents next year, next fiscal year, that is available primarily to pay debt service and also to fund capacity improvement projects in the state highway system and some local projects. Turning to page 3 is a history of the excise tax in in California. It's been in place since 1923, but since 1923, it's only been increased 6 times. There's only been 6 actions to increase that tax. The last one occurred with Proposition 111 in 1990. At that point, it increased the tax from 9 cents to 14 cents per gallon, and it came with 4 successive years of 1 cent increases to our current rate of 18 cents a gallon, which has been in place since 1994, just over 21 years, as Secretary Kelly mentioned. The next slide, moving to page 4, I believe, is a history of that gas tax rate compared to inflation. So along the bottom of this graph, the green bars show the nominal tax rate since 1923, again, starting at 2 cents a gallon and moving up to 18. And the green line shows the effects of inflation on that rate. I've heard many times folks say that the great heyday of transportation infrastructure was the 50s and 60s. And if you look at the value of this tax, even though the tax was 4.5 to 5 cents at the time, the value of that tax was much greater than it is today in terms of an inflation-adjusted tax rate. The other side of this, as we follow that green line to the right, is the last tax increase was in 1994. Inflation has eaten away half of that tax. It's worth less than 9 cents now in terms of 1994 dollars, the last time it was increased. That's a significant impact. Moving on to the next page, you'll see another impact that's sort of looming out there and heading our way. And again, Secretary Kelly alluded to this one as well. We're seeing more and more fuel-efficient cars into the roadway, which is great for a number of reasons. The problem that we have is, of course, we collect taxes for our roads based on the amount of fuel consumed. So as we get more and more fuel-efficient cars on the road, electric vehicles that use no fuel, hybrids that use very little fuel, we get less and less tax for the same amount of wear and tear on our system. So as we move forward, we're seeing this as being an even larger impact as inflation has been. Government standards, federal government standards say that a car sold in 2029 must have 55 miles to the gallon average. That's huge. And that is more than twice what the average car on the road is now. So we see that impact as being much larger in the future than it has been. So those things, those challenges sort of lead the way or point the way to how we got to where we are now, which is a $59 billion backlog in what we would call deferred maintenance or in rehabilitation of our highway system. So that comes from what we call the State Highway Operations and Protection Program, which is the department's plan and program to fix or to bring the state highway system up to a state of good repair. Doesn't fix everything, not every little thing, but it brings them up to acceptable standards that we set through our strategic planning process. So when you take a look at our total needs and the funding that's expected to be available over the next 10 years, we have a $59 billion shortfall. What makes up this shortfall is really a combination of things, but the largest areas are our roads themselves, the pavement and the structures underneath them, bridges, and then what I call invisible infrastructure, which is underneath the road surface in the form of intelligent transportation system elements and culverts, which is a means of moving water under a road. And so over the next few pages here, I'm going to show you some examples of what these different things are, starting with page, I believe, 7, which is entitled Pavement Rehabilitation. So we have more than 50,000 lane miles of roadway on the state highway system. So it's no surprise that pavement makes up really the largest portion of our backlog. And the pictures on this page show a couple of examples of really bad pavement conditions. You can see in both cases on the upper right and lower left, a very bad pavement that's caused either by just not being able to apply maintenance to these roadways because we don't have enough money to do so. And in a lot of cases, we have extreme heavy weight loads that erode the base of the road and cause deterioration on the top. So a pavement rehabilitation project would take into account not just the pavement on the top, the pavement that we see, but also addresses the structure underneath the pavement, which is really the difference between a maintenance type of project and a project that's beyond the help of maintenance, what we would call rehabilitation. So when you backlog projects, they get worse and worse and cost more and more to fix. And it's actually, it ends up motorists paying twice for this. One, they've got to pay for the damage caused to their vehicles by driving over these rough roads, and they have to pay again when we have to apply very expensive treatments to rehabilitate the road. Moving on to some bridge examples. We have about 13,000 bridges on the state highway system, and these are everything from large signature type of bridges to even overpasses or overcrossings on a freeway structure. The average age of these bridges is 43 years old, which is nearing the end in a lot of cases of their useful design life. So we have a lot of instances where they need complete replacement, where we can come back in and do retrofit, do rehabilitation, as in the case you see here on the bottom right, where a portion of the deck of the bridge has actually fallen away. It's not necessarily the bridge is collapsing, but the driving surface has fallen off the bridge, so we have to replace that. And then we have instances where we have heavy water flow events that might cause what we call scour around the foundation of the bridge that we need to protect against and mitigate. So those are examples of bridge rehabilitation and repair that are necessary. The next page, we talk about the first part of invisible infrastructure, which is culverts. And again, these are ways of moving stormwater or other water underneath a freeway section. The two pictures on the right are actually from Montana, but they are a pair of pictures that show what a culvert looks like when it fails from the opening of the culvert. You can see that it's collapsed there. And then what that does to the road surface, it's above the culvert. And that's the picture on the bottom right. You can see that the road surface has completely collapsed into the failed culvert. The picture on the bottom left is one of my favorite examples because it shows how a culvert, which is something you never think about, can really impact the highway, and in fact, in this case, impacted a driver on the highway. This is an example in Northern California on the North Coast Highway, where a culvert began to fail when water seeped through the culvert because it was corroded and began to create voids in the soil underneath the road surface. And when a tractor-trailer semi passed over this culvert, the tractor collapsed the road on top of the culvert, and the trailer fell into it. So if you look in the background of this picture, you see a trailer on the road without wheels, and those wheels are in that hole that you see. Yeah. And then once the road collapsed, the water rushes through there, and if you've ever built dams in the mud like I did when I was a kid, you know when you put a little hole in it, the water comes through and takes everything out. So in this case, the water flow carved a river channel right through the middle of the highway. And then the last element I would like to talk about is another invisible infrastructure element called intelligent transportation systems. And this is a real big bang for the buck item for the department in terms of increasing mobility on the existing system. This is made up of elements that detect traffic flow, that report back to traffic management centers for the department to take appropriate action, whether there's an incident to send out a response crew to, or if there's heavy traffic that we can respond to in some way. These are the types of ramp meters that you might see getting on the freeway that alternate cars to allow for a smooth convergence onto the freeway. And another use is to alert drivers onto what's coming up. If there's an accident ahead or maybe a faster travel time if you took a BART, for example, instead of driving into San Francisco, these changeable message signs allow us to get information out to the public so they can make a smart decision about how they want to travel. When you add those elements up, it's the majority of the $59 billion backlog by a significant amount. And of course, there are other areas within the program that I'm not going to go into for the sake of time. But the total backlog of $59 billion is a 10-year number. But as we look at inflation, which we talked about earlier on, and we look going forward, that inflation doesn't stop. We had some very good years after the recession in 2008 where we were able to save quite a bit of money on our projects when we set them out to bid. And we were able to reinvest $1.7 billion in project savings over the course of 5 years back into highway projects. And that allowed us to make up a lot of headway on some of these projects. But that's turned around now. The economy's back on solid footing. We're starting to see the prices of contract work go back up again. And we're estimating, based on historical trends, that a 5-year delay in addressing these problems can lead to a 20% increase in cost just because of inflation. And again, if we don't address these, there's an additional cost from continued deterioration as well. So the quicker we act, the less money it costs. And I'll stop there and answer questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. And we'll go to Jennifer Whiting, and she's the Ledge Director for the League of Cities. And welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Jennifer Whiting with the League of California Cities, actually Assistant Legislative Director.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to take Dan Kerrig's job quite yet. He might not like that. Thank you for having me here today. I think you'll hear a lot of the same themes that you've heard from the state for the local system. We undertook a project about 8 years ago, the Local Streets and Roads Needs Assessment, in response to the fact that when we were in these discussions on funding, because these discussions have been going on for a very long time, we weren't able to quantify the need on the local system as well as the state. So before you today, you have some slides and also some supporting materials from our most recent update that was released last October, the 2014 update. Our report began by looking at pavement condition. We use something called local governments use something called a pavement condition index. So you'll hear me talk about PCI throughout the presentation. It really began focused just on pavement. However, it's grown, and we now look at other essential components as well as local bridge needs. We focus on what is the condition, what is the funding shortfall, and then although we're not focused on, I'm not focused on it today because I'm not on the solutions panel, we did look at a few different solutions, and those are included in our report. Cities and counties in California maintain and own over 80% of the centerline miles in the state. That's over 143,000 centerline miles. You can see the breakdown in the pie chart. The 2008 report found our pavement condition index was at 68. Since that time, we've dropped to 66. And you might think, oh, just 2 points, that's really not a big deal, but I'll remind you we've had some pretty major one-time investments during those 6 years, including the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and Prop 1B, and we've still dropped 2 points. And then the next slide shows you a picture of what a street with a PCI of 66 has. It doesn't look too bad, but the next slide shows you our real concern. And that's the bell curve shows how much we're going to have to pay as the roads age. And as you can see, and Mr. Keck just talked about, we're right on the edge of moving from having to pay for just maintenance costs to rehabilitation costs. And it's going to cost us a lot more if our local streets and roads go into need rehabilitation instead of maintenance. The next slide shows you trends county by county. From 2008 to 2014, you can see it's pretty obvious. Green is good, blue is at risk, and then the red counties have poor average conditions throughout the county. You can see that the colors have changed pretty dramatically just in a 6-year period. Quite a few more red, much fewer green. We're really losing the green counties. We're concerned with that. Even the green counties actually are right on the verge of falling into the blue for the most part. So that's a trend we're very concerned with. I did hand out a couple maps in the supporting materials that I thought might be helpful to you. One is a county, this county map. Another is by your Senate districts. So you can see where your district is in the shortfall. On our website, we actually have county by county that show individual cities. So if you ever need that information, we have that and can share it with you. In response to lots of things, the cities and counties have been implementing some more environmentally friendly pavement strategies. One of the surprising, it's more expensive in the beginning to buy the technology and get it going, but what we found is that there are some of those technologies that not only have environmental benefits, but they also have financial benefits. And the amount of cities and counties that are using those pavement strategies are growing because we have seen this result. In particular, reclaim AC pavement, cold in place recycling, full depth reclamation, and pavement preservation are seeing pretty significant cost savings. So dual benefits. We're also seeing a jump in complete streets policies throughout the state. I was just talking to somebody in the corridor about the word expansion, and we also, like the state, are very focused on Fix It First. The league has adopted policy to support Fix It First policies, but we do want to expand what can be on the street. So you might take a street that only supports vehicles and add a bike lane or sidewalks. So you're expanding, or bus lanes or bus stops, so that you're expanding it in the way that more people are on that street and there are more uses, but it's still basically the same right-of-way. So the PCI is great. I know the maps are fun to look at, but really looking at dollars. The next 3 charts really look at the dollars. And to reach best management practices, which is about an 84 or 85 on the PCI scale, cities and counties would need an additional investment of a total investment of $7.3 billion a year. And we recognize that's a big lift and probably not a number we're going to see immediately, or if ever, but it's important for us to know where we could go. If we want to maintain where we are at 66, we need a total investment just for pavements of $3.3 billion a year. But where we are is at a level of $1.66 billion a year. And you can see on the chart with the red bar chart that at that, we're going to fall in 10 years to a PCI of 55. And I think out of all the charts that I've seen, this one impresses the urgency for me of acting on additional investment for transportation immediately. In 5 years, our backlog will grow by $11 billion just with no action. Nothing else involved in that. No inflation, no talking about additional construction costs. Just a delay in action will cost us $11 billion. Another rather startling, I found startling statistic in our report is that we currently have 6.2% of local streets and roads in failed condition. If we don't act in 10 years, that grows to 25%. I cannot imagine a California with a quarter of the local streets and roads in failed condition. It's not a future that I see for our state, or I want to see for our state. Moving on to local bridges, you'll see that 50% of bridges in California are owned and maintained by cities and counties. This includes the National Bridge Inventory, about 12,000 bridges, in addition to another 3,500 bridges that are less than 20 feet long that we maintain. Like the state system, local bridges are getting old. You will see 55% are past their ideal lifetime and require rehabilitation or replacement. Again, we're right on that cliff. You'll see just in the 40 to 49 year range, there is a significant number of bridges that are going to join the ones that are out of date very soon. I'm going to skip the next slide just for sake of time. We also looked at essential components, which include sidewalks, curb ramps, curb and gutter, storm drains, streetlights, signs, retaining walls, all of those other things that go with a local street and road, and found that their 10-year needs is $31 billion. Our current funding level is $10.1 billion. So the shortfall for the essential components is $20.9 billion. So taking all of those numbers and putting them together, you can see on the next slide that the total 10-year needs for local streets and roads is $108 billion. Our estimated or projected funding is just under $30 billion. That leaves us with a projected shortfall of $78.3 billion. I get a lot of questions about how local streets and roads are paid for, and that's a very complicated question to answer because every city and county does it a little bit different. But we have on the next slide just general, whether the funds come from local funds, so that could be a general fund, it could be federal fund, or not federal funds, but general fund, a local initiative, something like that, and then the state, and then the federal. So 54% of our total funding for local streets and roads actually comes from the state. So more than 50%. About 93% of that comes from the state gas tax, which is why you'll hear us talk about that a lot this year. So our findings are on the next slide, but I kind of talked about that. And conclusions, I think, very similar to the state. You know, our entire economy relies on our transportation system. We have to invest in it and keep it up to date. And we really need new sustainable sources of revenues. We've been very concerned with what's going on with the variable gas tax rate, and I have to thank the chair for introducing SB 321 to help stabilize that fund a little bit. It's definitely a discussion that we appreciate going forward. Cities and counties, well, I can't speak for the counties, but cities and I believe counties look at the entire California transportation system as just that, a system. We all have to work together to move California forward. We're here to be your partners. We hope to have very fruitful conversations with you that will lead to a better system overall for the state. Thank you.